This is Rick Mansfield with Accordance Bible Software, and I'm talking to Theron Mathis, who is the writer of a book that we just recently released for the Accordance Library, The Rest of the Bible, a guide to the Old Testament of the early church. Now, Theron, I should say real quick that you and I have known each other for a long time.
We have.
Yeah.
We have.
Since the 90s.
Yeah, easily 25 years, probably.
Yeah, easily 25 years that we've known each other. Back far enough when we were both Baptist, in fact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
So, anyway, Theron, I want maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and what prompted you to write the rest of the Bible. What was kind of the origin of this book?
Okay. So I have a background in biblical studies. I graduated from Baptist Seminary in '99, and not long after I graduated, I actually became Eastern Orthodox Christian. And shortly thereafter, I joined up with a group that was translating the Greek Old Testament into English. It had been a long time since that had been done, at least in kind of a more modern translation. So I was part of that project and had worked on First and Second Samuel were the books I'd done, and then also done some of the study notes.
And this is in the Orthodox Study Bible.
The Orthodox Study Bible is
which we have as well in the Accordance Library.
So after that came out, I taught adult Sunday school at our church, and I had several people ask me about, hey, there's a bunch of books in the Old Testament that we don't know. I don't know what these are. And it was the extra Old Testament books that the Orthodox and the Catholics also have in their canon of Scripture. So, people were asking me questions about it, and I wanted to know what the books were about. And at the time, to be honest, I had read them, but I didn't have a lot of knowledge of them. So I told them, I said, hey, give me a year. I'll do some study on this, and then we'll teach class on it. So that's exactly what I did. And then at the end of that class, somebody said, you should put that together in a book. And so that was kind of the origin of how this happened. It came out of that adult Sunday school class. Study on these books is where it got put together.
That's great. And so the book itself, in your book, you're writing about these books that are basically, these are books of the Bible that aren't in Protestant Bibles. But they're in, like you said, they're in Orthodox and Catholic Bibles with a little bit of variation between them.
Variation.
Yeah. And right there in the introduction, you refer to these additional books as readables. What are the readables? Where does that word come from?
So part of the reason I use that word was a lot of times they're referred to as the Apocrypha. Mm-hmm. And that's really a misnomer because Apocrypha means hidden.
Right.
And it's not like these books were secret knowledge that was hidden away from Christians or anything. These were well known to Christians from the beginning, and even Jewish believers prior to the coming of Christ. So it wasn't like these were hidden or anything. It's just after the Protestant Reformation, they got dropped out of the Protestant canon. So Apocrypha kind of just is I thought, a bad word. It didn't really describe what they do. The other word that often gets used is deuterocanonical, or secondary canon.
That's what the Catholics call them.
Exactly. And there's some problems with that too, because it makes them seem like, okay, they're not scripture. They're kind of secondary scripture, or an addendum in a sense. And at least in the Orthodox Church, they're seen as scripture or part of the canon. And where I took the word readable, I didn't make it up. It actually comes from a Greek word that Athanasius used himself to describe these books. And I won't try to pronounce the Greek word, but it basically means books that are worthy to be read, or it can be literally translated the readable. So that's what we stuck on, at least for the to describe these books.
Let me kind of sidestep here. You talked about the Catholics calling these Deuterocanon. And the Orthodox don't put them on a secondary status, even though they have a label for this grouping. Do you see a difference between East and West in what is thought of as canon?
I think I would say in the West, and this is true for both Catholics and Protestants, they're definitely stricter about these books are canon.
Right.
In the Orthodox Church, it tends to be if these books are used in church
Right.
and have been historically used in church, they're canon. And so because of that, you do sometimes see among even Orthodox groups that there'll be some books that they may have in their canon, primarily the Old Testament, that aren't present in every single Orthodox church because of that. But it's books that they've always used, either on feast days or in other places where they're read. And so it's a little more fluid, but primarily it's books that the church has kind of agreed on. Hey, these books contain God's revelation.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't there like three categories? The books to be read, the readables, the books to be read in the home. You know, like the books that are read in the church, books that are read in the home, and then books not to be read. Don't read these.
That's basically it. Yeah, exactly. Because, for example, in the Orthodox Church, we don't read the book of Revelation in any of our New Testament readings. Now, we quote from Revelation often during hymns and prayers and things like that.
But it's not part of the lectionary. It's not part of the daily readings.
Yep, you're exactly right.
And my understanding on that was that Revelation was really not accepted as canon in the East until later, and all the lectionary readings were set by that time. So
I think that's probably right.
Yeah.
I think that's right.
Well, as you're writing this book, what are some surprising things that you found out about these additional books, these extra books that you weren't familiar with back in your Baptist days?
So I will say the one thing that I thought really surprised me is how much it illuminated the New Testament, especially when you read the historical books like the Maccabees. Those books in particularly, just from a historical perspective, they definitely bridged the gap kind of between Malachi and Christ that we see in Matthew. And it's funny, as a Baptist, we often refer to those as the silent years.
Yeah, right.
Or the time where God wasn't speaking, but he was, and God continued to watch after his people. Now, they did good and bad things, just like they did in the Old Testament that most people are familiar with. But it definitely helps you understand the context that Jesus and the apostles enter into in the first century. So that would be probably my number one thing. The other thing that surprised me, or at least the books where I got the greatest amount of personal value, I would say, are the two wisdom books, Wisdom of Solomon and Wisdom of Sirach.
Sure.
And in reading both those books, I felt like I was like, I can't believe I never spent any time with those, because there was just so much personal benefit on how to live a godly life, how to stay close to God, how to avoid sin. They're very, very practical books, very similar to Proverbs. I joke with friends that Sirach is like Proverbs on steroids. Number one, it's so large compared to the Proverbs, but it's very practical. The other thing, and I'll mention just what you find in Sirach that kind of surprised me is how much influence both Wisdom of Solomon and Sirach had on the New Testament writing. As you read through those books, you will begin to hear echoes of things that Paul says in his epistles, and even Christ, especially on the Sermon on the Mount and things like that, become really clear that, these ideas they were pulling from books that would have been familiar to the people in the first century, and they would have understood and known very well. Like, for example, on page 101 in my book, just mentioned this briefly. The Sermon on the Mount in Matthew is full of similarities with Sirach. Jesus' golden rules can be found in Sirach 31:15. Understand the things of your neighbors by your own in every matter. Be considerate. So it's maybe not as succinct as Jesus' statement on do unto others as you would have them do unto you, but still, it's consider your neighbor before you act.
Right.
The same kind of principle. And I know, at least in the book, I give a chart in both Wisdom of Solomon and in Sirach where there's similarities between passages in the New Testament as well, where it definitely appears that the New Testament writers understood, read, and found value in these books, and it definitely influenced their understanding of morality and the way God works in the world.
Yeah, and I'm looking at that chart here. I think it's interesting because I remember even back in seminary days taking Greek classes, and back when we were Baptists, you and I were at the same school, although kind of at different times. But the you take your Greek your Nestle Aland or your UBS Greek New Testament, you start looking at that cross reference system, and they actually have cross references to Wisdom of Sirach and some of these other books, but they were just often ignored, and sometimes you'd even hear, well, there's really no connection between these books in the New Testament, but it is actually there, and even your first point about the gap between, like, if you were just to go straight from Malachi to the Gospels, there are situations that have changed so greatly,
Right.
why are these groups there, Pharisees and Sadducees and Zealots, and how come there's a Roman occupation, and how come there are all these divisions, and why is there an Idumean king here? And again, these books are chronicling a lot of the history that is just kind of left out.
Yeah.
And it seems very valuable. Even for a Protestant, if a Protestant says, okay, well, I'm not going to accept that as canon, I think there's still value even for the Protestants to say, this is how we understand the content, the political context of what's going on when the Messiah is born.
Correct. Yeah, I agree. And I think one thing that has been helpful probably in the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years, kind of with the rise of scholarship around Second Temple Judaism.
Right.
And so that's become way more a more accepted way to look at the New Testament.
Yeah.
You have to include
right
all these books in part of that Second Temple literature.
And Septuagint studies is just blossoming right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Theron, for letting us talk about your book for a few minutes.
Thank you.
And I hope that it will do well with our Accordance users. A lot to be gained from it. And I should point out, it is not a big book. This would be a great one to put even on an iPad. And it is, it's 132 or 3 or 4 pages there. It's not very long at all. So that would make a great just book to sit there and read through, take a few notes, that kind of thing. So, well, thank you very much, Theron.
Thank you, Rick.